The American Revolution is traditionally remembered as a moment of national triumph for the United States and a profound humiliation for the British Empire. In popular imagination, it appears as a crushing defeat, after which London should have sought revenge. Yet for Britain itself, the end of the war in 1783 did not represent collapse, but a painful and manageable withdrawal. George III viewed the loss of the colonies as a blow to prestige, but not as a threat to the survival of the state. Unlike Spain or France in earlier eras, British power was not built solely upon control of vast continental territories. Its true foundations were the navy, trade, and the financial system, and all of those remained intact. British ministers, beginning with Lord North and his successors, operated from a simple understanding. Empires collapse not because they lose territory, but because they lose control over global flows of resources. After the separation of the colonies, that control was not lost. Economic reality quickly demonstrated that the formal independence of the United States changed very little in the structure of Atlantic trade. British merchants, bankers, and shipowners continued to play a central role in the American economy. The trading houses of Liverpool and Bristol financed exports. The Bank of England and private London creditors supplied American enterprises with capital, and the factories of Manchester continued flooding American markets with textiles. The ideas of Adam Smith regarding the advantages of free trade over direct colonial rule received practical confirmation. The profits remained, while the costs disappeared. The political structure of the newly formed United States only reinforced London's belief that the situation did not require immediate action. In European capitals, America was long perceived as an unfinished project. Politicians such as William Pitt the Younger and Edmund Burke viewed the Republic not as a stable state, but as an experiment with an uncertain future. The weakness of the federal government under the Articles of Confederation, the inability to effectively collect taxes, Congress's dependence on the will of individual states, and the near autonomy of each state created the image of a system vulnerable to internal conflict. To monarchical Europe, this resembled not the rise of a great power, but a condition close to pre-revolutionary chaos, familiar from the history of the Netherlands or the Italian republics. This skepticism was reinforced by Britain's own historical experience. The Republican period under Oliver Cromwell remained in collective memory as an example that abandoning monarchy rarely produced lasting stability. Thinkers and publicists, from David Hume to Samuel Johnson, doubted that large states could endure for long without a hereditary elite, a symbolic center of authority, and a traditional source of legitimacy. America possessed neither a royal dynasty nor an aristocracy, and this led many in London to believe that in a moment of serious crisis, it would seek support outside itself rather than create a new form of stability from scratch. At the same time, the cultural and legal divide between the former colonies and the mother country appeared limited. Americans continued speaking English, using common law, relying upon British legal traditions, and adhering to Protestant ethics. Thomas Jefferson may have been a committed opponent of monarchy, but American courts still cited the works of William Blackstone. From Britain's perspective, the United States did not look like an entirely new civilization, but rather a separated branch of a familiar world that preserved the same cultural and institutional foundations. This logic of waiting began to collapse only with the events unfolding in Europe. The French Revolution, followed by the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, fundamentally transformed London's strategic priorities. For William Pitt the Younger and his cabinet, the primary objective became the containment of France. the preservation of control over the English Channel, the defense of the British Isles, and the financing of coalitions on the continent. Against the scale of that threat, even the possible collapse of the United States no longer seemed strategically significant. When tensions between Britain and the United States eventually erupted into the War of 1812, the empire was already operating at the limit of its capabilities. London's principal objective was not the restoration of control over America, but the prevention of the loss of Canada. British military and naval leadership fully understood that a full occupation of the United States would require enormous manpower, vulnerable Atlantic supply lines, and constant resistance from the population. Even the burning of Washington in 1814 was primarily symbolic and was never viewed as the beginning of an imperial restoration. As the war concluded, Britain still possessed certain levers of influence, but the diplomacy of Lord Castlereagh was guided by broader considerations. Europe was emerging from nearly 20 years of almost continuous warfare, and its stability depended upon the balance of power and mutual trust between the great powers. Territorial demands against the United States could have prolonged the conflict, complicated negotiations at the Congress of Vienna, and transformed America into a long-term enemy. The decision to abandon revanchism was a conscious choice in favor of future stability, not a sign of weakness. During the 19th century, the British Empire permanently shifted its focus. India and Asia offered revenue, governability, and protection secured by naval supremacy. North America, by contrast, was becoming increasingly populated, industrialized, and ideologically independent. Any attempt to reclaim what had been lost there would have meant a prolonged and expensive war with an uncertain outcome and a serious risk to Canada itself. Over time, it became clear that London's calculations after the Revolution had been wrong. The American Republic did not collapse, did not return to monarchy, and did not lose its internal legitimacy. What had once appeared temporary became a durable reality. Britain never formally announced that it had abandoned the idea of reclaiming the United States. The idea simply lost its relevance. There was no single moment, no single decision, and no official declaration. It dissolved into new priorities and new strategic calculations. The empire did not refrain from retaking America because it lacked power, but because at every stage, history presented a more rational path. By the time the question might have required a final answer, the course of events itself had already made that answer inevitable.